I want to give you a whirlwind trip through Florida as what we're seeing for 2020. First of all, I want to set a little bit of context just to show you what this says. The recent Gallup poll shows that the number one problem that Americans see is government itself. No shock there. These first slides that I'm going to show you have to do with the context that politics is occurring within, and government and poor leadership and politicians tops the list of what people see as a problem facing the country. You think you're going to get compromised? No. This was a survey. It says, I'm tired of leaders compromising my values and ideals. I want leaders who will stand up to the other side. The number of people who say that is increasing, not decreasing. So any idea that you're going to win with saying you're going to compromise, it really doesn't look that way. We are the most polarized nation that we've been in American history. Even shopping today. If you buy Wranglers, you're a Republican. If you buy Levi's, you're a Democrat. That's the way it's gotten into the marketing. That's how bad it is right now. And I'm serious about that. But really the problem that politicians face, and you in business too, is that how we're getting news to people is changing by the snap of a finger. Technology is changing. How we get news to people, who's relying on what. The differences are by party, age, gender, race, education. But the big problems, again, communication. Trust in the media is slipping. In fact, it's sharply declining. And even the rise is now in distrust of social media. This was a poll that was taken recently, which you see shows how little faith that Americans have in media at the moment. The last two statistics are particularly troublesome in this political environment that we're in right now, but a lot of it's because of the 24/7 news cycle that people have to fill, and they write things before they know the facts, and the public sees that it's happening all the time. But here, look at this. Even social media, which now everybody claims is going to be the real savior of communication. Here again, you see Americans really souring on social media itself, and particularly uncivil discussions and censorship and inaccuracies and one-sidedness are all the same kinds of criticisms we see about the regular, traditional media. Look at this, though. This is significant to all of us. It is the most troubling thing that I've seen of late. Look at this. 82% of our four-year colleges and universities don't require even a basic course in government or history. And for you, look at that. 98% don't require a course in economics. This makes it easier for people to spread lies and mistrusts and everything else. I think this is one of the most serious problems that business and government and nonprofits and everybody else face. Is this statistic right here. But let's look at Florida real quick. We're considered, you might have seen a recent article that described Florida as the most competitive state, the tiebreaker to end all tiebreakers, and that's probably where Florida is going to end up again this year. But here are the reasons why we are considered the most diverse state. And it has to do with party registration, our racial and ethnic diversity, our age diversity, which a lot of people have been talking about a little bit, and then the three key geographies of politics: cities, suburban areas, and rural areas. And we always say in my business, you take statistics from 2 years prior election and try to run with them this year, and you could lose. I mean, that's how fast Florida changes. Certain counties have already changed from the last election in their partisan composition. But even prior to last year, we had 4 elections in a row, 2 presidential and 2 gubernatorial, where the margin of victory was 1%. But now Florida is the 0.5% state. No other state comes close to the competitiveness that we see in Florida politics. This is pretty stunning, where we had 6 races go to recount last time out in 2018. And this is a statistic which is really worrying both political parties to the max. Look at what the biggest increase is in people who are registering as no party affiliation or minor parties. Both mainstream political parties are worried to death about this trend. And I'm going to show you in a little bit who exactly those NPAs are. Look at the counties that are highly competitive, and that's by share, the percentage. Pinellas, the most, followed by Polk, Lafayette. If you're a true Floridian, you know it's Lafayette, not Lafayette. And Seminole and Volusia, most of those counties are in the I-4 corridor, which is the swing part of the swing state. But it is incredible that we have these kinds of competitive geographies in our state that you would be hard-pressed to find in any other state in the country. And look at this, though. This is what I was talking about. In certain counties already, you see that one of the two parties is being outnumbered registration-wise by no party affiliation. So in Charlotte, Clay, Collier, Lee, Martin, Okaloosa, Santa Rosa, and Walton, there's more NPAs than there are Democrats registered right now. And on the other side, Broward, Miami-Dade, Orange, Osceola, Palm Beach, more NPAs than Republicans. This is the trend in our state. A little bit more now, I said that we have one of the most racially and ethnically diverse states, and you see right here that over a third of our current registered voters are non-whites, with Hispanics at 17%, blacks at 13%, Asian 2%, and other, which is mostly biracial, which is a growing category, around 5%. Look at this, though. We have certain media markets. Florida has 10 media markets. The rest of the country, 1 or 2. We have 10. It cost $3 million last year to keep one ad up for 1 week in all 10 media markets, and it's going to be more expensive this coming years up. But look at the counties that, look at Miami, is already majority non-white. And you can look at the other areas. The green reflects Hispanic proportions of registered voters, and the black would be the dark color, and Asian red, and so forth. So we have tremendous diversity across our state, and it really does vary by media market. It's also true that we have the most diverse Hispanic population of any state in the country. And you'll look at that middle square there, 39% of Florida's Hispanics are registered as Ds, 24% Rs, 36% though as independents. And that has always been the case. And it's often the case that Hispanics who come straight from Puerto Rico here tend to register as NPAs. I had students who told me from Puerto Rico it's because they don't know what a Democrat or Republican is, and they really don't understand our federal system. But we also, interestingly, have the most diverse black population in the country, with the rise of the Caribbeans and their strength in local politics and increasingly in state legislative politics down in Southeast Florida. But here's the real story. Florida is only going to become more and more racially and ethnically diverse. And a lot of that has to do with younger population, as we'll see. Our population is, in terms of voting population, younger and more diverse and less likely to belong to a party. If you look at this stat, 46%, almost half of our registered voters are under age 50. A lot of people don't realize that. And if you look at it generationally, which is by far the better way to analyze politics these days than sheer chronological age, you see the three youngest generations are 54% of Florida's current registered voters. So the idea that it's only old people that vote, we have seen a real change as a consequence of what happened in 2018 with Parkland and some other things. The younger generation is by far the most environmentally sensitive and environmentally driven in terms of their politics. But look at this. The green bar reflects NPAs. Look at the younger generation, Generation Z, that's 18 to 21-year-olds, almost 40% are registering as NPAs. And when you think about it, they look at Washington and they don't see any difference between the two parties, and they don't see them doing anything except fighting with each other. So it's really not shocking at all. We know from 2018 that younger voters are driven by individual candidates, by their inspirational aspects, by their ability to talk specifically to younger people in a sort of demeaning way, and they value, very importantly for business as well, they value diversity. It's one of their top ideals that they're looking for in candidates. Already you see the intersection between race and party. Our Generation Z is now already less than half of our Generation Z registered voters in Florida are white. So things are really changing in this intersection between generations and race and ethnicity. Women have always been a majority of registered voters in our state. I call your attention, though, now to the 3% unknown. Some of you are aware of the fact that there are increasingly pressures not to use binary definitions of gender. That's starting to bubble up a little bit on college campuses. But it's also true that women make up a much, much larger share of Florida's registered Democrats than of Florida's registered Republicans. Males are a majority of minor parties and females a plurality on NPAs. But you can understand there the rise of a lot of women running for office. We saw record numbers last time out. We're going to see record numbers again in 2020 for a lot of different positions in Florida. It's also true that you see the gender gap is widest itself. Again, African Americans are by far women outnumbering men. It's why you see people like Stacey Abrams and black women in politics doing well across the country. It's because of these kinds of statistics. I didn't show a stat up there, but let me say that right now there's a huge gender gap in people who are graduating from four-year colleges, including 4 years degrees in Florida, a huge gender gap across all races. Women are graduating from four-year universities and men less so, and that's a trend that's affecting business as well. Where do our voters live? 45% of them live in the I-4 corridor media markets. That's almost half of Florida's electorate. Those two media markets are also Florida's most racially and ethnically diverse. But in a state where things are won by 0.5%, do you think you could ignore Gainesville? Even though I'm Seminole, that would be fine, but nonetheless, I'm just kidding. I did go to the game, so I had to bear that. But anyway, it's really an incredibly expensive state to run in, and every media market is different in the composition. And you can see the urban, rural, and suburban voting patterns. These were the results of the 2018 governor's race. The lighter the shade, the more competitive. So if you look at that I-4 corridor area stretching from Pinellas County over to Volusia, you see shades of red and blue. The really heavily blue counties are in Broward, and then, of course, you have Gainesville and Tallahassee and the Panhandle. But you can really see that we have urban, rural, and suburban kinds of voting patterns in this state. Now, looking ahead to next year, these are kind of the turnout rates over time in terms of the first primary and then the general election. We're expecting, obviously, right now, everyone is expecting record turnout in 2020 in Florida and across the country itself. Looking back last year, this is one of the reasons Democrats lost, even though there have never been more registered Republicans than Democrats in Florida. A lot of people don't realize that. But the key is in turnout. And of course, you know, a lot of the, right now, if you're a Democrat, a lot of the emphasis in the party is on trying to improve turnout of the base particularly. And by race, you see here that black turnout, and in a lot of places in Florida, in the cities, black turnout actually exceeds white turnout. But the real problem is the lower turnout is typically been among Hispanics in our state. And the gap in turnout rate, obviously the under 30 and so forth is a little less. Don't use this as a benchmark for next year because in presidential races, there's far less generational difference in turnout than there is in a midterm race. But here is really a difficult thing about campaigning. We don't have an election day. We have election days and months. And it's very interesting because if you're running a campaign you have to campaign a little bit differently early on to try to reach those who vote by mail or overseas voters. And you have to run a different campaign to try and grab people the last day on election day. But 2/3 of our voters now vote before election day. Now, looking ahead to next year, we have 3 elections, March 17th. A lot of Democrats are really upset that Florida's primary is March 17th, along with Arizona and Illinois. Some of you from the Tampa area know that I'm the analyst for the ABC station in Tampa, and early on I was sent down to the state Democratic Party state convention, and I heard a lot of Democrats that I interviewed saying they were upset. They thought that Florida wouldn't matter by the time that the primary gets to Florida. But I beg to differ. I think we could very well be the deal maker or breaker on that, because I don't think with this many candidates ahead that it's going to be resolved before it gets to Florida. Now, what are Democrats saying right now? Of course, there isn't any real good data on Republicans because nobody's going to beat Trump for the primary. So the interesting thing here is the Democrats, which all of the polls keep saying that what they're looking for is somebody that can beat Trump and far less ideology, etc. Don't buy this necessarily, because I think one of the things that you're seeing within Democrats in Florida and across the country, the deepest generational divide that we've ever seen. And it's going to be hard till you get ideological differences. The young people are very, very progressive, and they don't like older candidates, legacy candidates. We've seen that before in Florida. They say that they prefer a moderate candidate. This is just national. This is not just Florida. But these are things that you hear talked about right now. But one thing is that it's pretty clear that socialism is still not particularly popular. It's pretty consistent in that poll. In terms of the polling that's been done in Florida, not much to this point, really. Just 4 polls, and I'm going to be going out a little bit on the limb here and saying that polls in Florida haven't had a good track record of being correct. And so, you can just take a look at these. The polling is difficult in our state because of language. And there is an old saying among some political analysts, add 5 points to the Republicans because of the demonization of Republicans, and some won't admit that they're going to vote for a presidential candidate that's a Republican, particularly one named Donald Trump. So you can just do what you like with that, but that's a common theory. But it's not just the presidency. We have really key races coming up. It wouldn't take more than the flip of a few seats to change the Florida Senate from Republican control to Democrat. It would take a lot more to switch the House. Our congressional delegation, we don't have a Senate race. We have some very, very competitive House races coming up. The stakes are very high across the board in Florida for both parties for some of the reasons we've talked about. But why in the world would I be ridiculous to come up here and say who's going to win next year in November? There's too many reasons for uncertainty. Population growth, which we've had a lot of evidence of today, domestically and internationally. What's going to be the issue by the time people start voting next year? Is it going to be this, that, or the other? News saturation means that issues change. Go back to 2018 governor's race. The first thing up was the Confederate monument issue, which everybody thought a year out would be the dominant issue by the time people voted for governor in November of 2018. Then we went through Me Too. Then we went through Parkland. Then we went through blue-green algae. Then we went through Hamilton tickets and so forth. We don't know what news saturation is going to do for what the issue is. And by the way, I could vote by mail, which I get my mail ballot early, and the issue of that day might be different than somebody who waits until election day. This is why political consultants are making a lot of money trying to figure this out, but good luck. And of course, I've already mentioned the growing generational divide, and we don't know who the presidential nominee is going to be, and we certainly have cause and pause looking at polls in Florida, because there's not a poll on earth that can predict turnout on election day or turnout in general. But what are we as analysts really watching? I'm keeping my eye on this younger vote that's going to be a larger share than usual of this next election. What's going to happen with Amendment 4? We have it in the court still. We see some counties are already continuing to register felons, regardless of the problems that we have in the courts right now. We are going to continue to see, as the 900 people coming in here a day, people coming from other places, but also an increase in minority and immigrant populations, the rising number of NPAs, and obviously, we've always said Americans are pocketbook voters. What will the economy look like by the time people start voting next year? We also, being Florida, we can't ever escape the 2000 election. Some of you remember that. I went 36 hours with no sleep. It wasn't fun. But nonetheless, across the country, people are worried about the security of the election system with cybersecurity and the threats last time out. We have definitely going to see the top two primary. The jungle primary is definitely going to make the ballot. This is be very threatening to political parties. It means that anybody that wants to run for office, regardless of party, runs on the same thing, and then it goes to a runoff afterwards of the top two. Only 2 states have it, Louisiana, California. Go talk to them and before you vote on this one. And of course, fraudulent messaging we've seen already. It's easy to pull the wool over people's eyes. There are plenty of people that do it. And vote harvesting, where you grab people's ballots and you hold them or you take them in mass. We have that. Plus, we are clearly going to see more activism and more protests across the board this election cycle. We're going to see in Florida, again, a siege of amendments on the ballot. Overlooking all of this is the 2020 census, and everybody's thinking about how we vote now is going to affect what redistricting looks like 2 years down the way. A lot on the plate of Floridians, for sure. Right now, I think the only thing we have issue-wise to kind of go on is a little bit looking back at 2018 for Democrats in Florida. The 2 mobilizing issues were health care and guns. And the 2 for Republicans were immigration and the economy, which would include taxation. You kind of see the same patterns, a little bit evident right now, but not as sharp. And so the real unknown is impeachment. And I think this was a stunning, if you read the New York Times a couple of days ago, you might have seen this headline. No one believes anything. Voters are worn out by a fog of political news. And this is a terrible time for impeachment to go before the public when people are thinking holidays and shopping, and they're just kind of tuning it out right now. That's kind of what you see. But as I see it, these are the biggest challenges for each political party heading into 2020. For Democrats, they lost control of working class whites, which was a key base of theirs for years. And they face potential turnout problems depending on who's nominated, generational and racial and ethnic splits, for example. And Hispanic turnout, we know, is a challenge. On Republican side, they're really challenged by white college-educated women and suburban women voters with children, K through 12. They are often the swing voters in our state. And of course, they have a potential turnout problem, again, of never Trumpers just not showing up. And any one of these groups that decides to stay home en masse. So for going back to Democrats, if young people stay home, if a progressive's not nominated, the party will have the same problem they had. Hillary Clinton lost Florida because younger Sanders voters just didn't vote. They didn't vote for Trump. So you have these kinds of odd schisms that are existing in both parties. I think, in summary, this is the best statement of where we are right now. In a country or state like ours, increasingly engaged in national politics and divided, the next 12 months may feel like 12 years. Anybody agree? But I think the key statement is the second part of this, which is voters in both trenches are eager to vote, convinced not only of victory, but of vindication. I think that's pretty much where we are. So there's only one thing that I can leave you with that I'm pretty sure about. It's going to be close again in our state. Thank you.